Okay, so, like, get this, right? The International Criminal Court, the ICC,
Yeah.
they're facing sanctions from the U.S.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's a big deal because, like, the ICC, it's basically the world's court, right?
Right.
For holding people accountable, like individuals accountable for, the worst crimes imaginable, like genocide, war crimes, all that really heavy stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a big deal.
So this whole thing is raising some really, really serious questions about, like, what's the future of international justice?
Yeah.
So we dove into some sources this week,
Yeah.
and it feels like, when you have two cars heading straight at each other, like a head-on collision,
Mm-hmm.
that's what this is. Like the U.S. and the ICC, they're on a collision course.
Yeah.
And it could have huge consequences, not just for them, but for, like, everyone.
I bet.
Yeah. So one of the sources we looked at was The Guardian, and they were talking about how the ICC is responding to these sanctions.
Mm.
And basically they're defiant. They're like, we're not backing down.
Yeah.
They're committed to, to justice, to holding people accountable,
Right.
no matter what the pressure.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I got to ask, what's the deal with these sanctions?
Yeah.
Like, what are they really about?
Well, I mean, the sanctions themselves, they're pretty intense.
Okay.
They're talking about freezing assets, which that could be bank accounts, property, all sorts of things.
Mhm.
And then there's travel bans. So ICC personnel and their families, they can't travel.
Wow.
Yeah, this stuff can really stop the court from being able to do its job, to operate and investigate cases.
Yeah, it's pretty hard-hitting,
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's something more to this, right?
Oh, for sure.
Is the U.S., like, trying to send a message?
I think it's possible.
Like, is it bigger than just this one case?
This isn't the first time that the U.S. has put pressure on the ICC.
I was going to say, it sounds familiar.
We saw this with the Trump administration,
Yeah.
Back then, they were specifically targeting the ICC prosecutor.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, so definitely a historical context here.
Okay, so, like, what set off this latest round of sanctions? What's the trigger?
Well, the sources we looked at, they all point to the ICC's investigation against Israel.
Okay.
And it's specifically focused on potential war crimes in the Gaza Strip.
That's a really sensitive situation.
Incredibly sensitive.
Yeah, and I read somewhere that there might even be an arrest warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yeah, that's been floating around.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, this is we were talking about a car crash before, but this is like a whole different level.
Yeah, it's like, who's David and who's Goliath in this situation?
Right.
And how does that affect the whole power dynamic,
Yeah, that's the big question.
It's a big one.
It is. And, the ICC, they're not taking this lying down.
I wouldn't expect them to.
No, in response to these sanctions, they've called for international support. They're basically saying, hey, everyone, states, civil society, everybody, we need you to stand up for justice and human rights.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, a strong statement, and it'll be interesting to see how the international community reacts,
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a turning point.
Absolutely.
What could this standoff mean for the future of international justice?
Well, that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if the U.S. is successful with this, if they manage to pressure the ICC through these sanctions, it could set a really dangerous precedent.
How so?
Well, it could embolden other nations, right?
Uh-huh.
They might start thinking, hey, we can defy international courts too.
Right.
And that could weaken the whole system, the whole idea of global accountability.
Yeah, the ripple effects could be huge.
Absolutely. It goes way beyond just this one case.
So, like, to recap, we've got the U.S. using its power, the ICC standing their ground, and this whole web of, like, international relations all tangled up.
Yeah, it's a mess.
What a situation.
It is.
So, as we finish up here, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Yeah.
What does this whole conflict tell us about, the balance of power in the world today? And what could it mean for holding people accountable for these really serious crimes? Not just now, but in the future.
Yeah, big questions.
Big questions.
Definitely.
All right, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.